His name was Asterion. In Greek, it means starry one, a name fit for a prince, not a monster. Ancient sources record him as blood of King Minos, born into the royal house of Crete. But this child would never sit on a throne. He was sealed inside a lightless maze, stripped of his identity, and remembered only as the Minotaur. The tragedy of Asterion isn't that he was killed by a hero, it's that the people who put him there may have been the true monsters, and it all started with a king's broken promise to a god. Asterion was not a name whispered in fear, but one drawn from the stars. In the Greek language, Asterion means starry one, a name that once belonged to kings and heroes of Crete. The earliest surviving manuscripts, including Codex Vaticanus Graecus and Papyrus Beryl P21, preserve this name in their accounts. In Apollodorus's Bibliotheca, the text reads, Pasiphae bore a monstrous child, Asterion, whom the Cretans called the Minotaur. There, in the heart of the royal genealogy, Asterion stands not as a beast, but as a prince, born of Pasiphae, queen of Crete, and marked by the blood of King Minos himself. The name, built from the Greek root aster for star, carries a weight of cosmic significance. It evokes the ancient Cretan tradition of naming rulers after the heavens, as if to bind their fate to the constellations above. Yet the name Asterion is more than a title. It is a thread connecting him to the royal house and to the sacred myths of the island. The same name belonged to an earlier king of Crete, son of Zeus and Europa, whose legacy shaped the island's destiny. To bear such a name was to inherit expectation, to be seen as a future sovereign, not an outcast. But the myth would not allow Asterion to remain a child of promise. The manuscripts never waver. Asterion, the Minotaur, is both man and bull, both royal and reviled. Scholars debate whether this dual naming was meant to humanize the creature, to remind later generations that the Minotaur was not born a monster, but made into one by the fear and shame of others. The consistency of the name across centuries of manuscript tradition argues for its authenticity, as if the ancient scribes refused to let Asterion's true identity be erased. In the world of Minoan Crete, where bull-leaping frescoes adorned the palace walls, and the bull itself was a symbol of fertility and divine power, the birth of a bull child was a sign both wondrous and terrifying. Naming him Asterion was an act of hope, a wish that he might find a place among the stars, or at least among his kin. Instead, his name became a secret, spoken only in the margins of myth and in the careful hands of classicists who still read those ancient lines. Before the labyrinth's darkness, before the walls closed in, Asterion was a prince with a name that shimmered like starlight. His tragedy began not in the maze, but in the moment his own family turned away, choosing secrecy over acceptance and shame over love. If you are intrigued by Asterion's hidden story, hit subscribe now. The royal halls of Knossos, once vibrant with festival and the echoes of bull-leaping games, grew silent in the wake of Asterion's birth. The palace walls, covered in frescoes of leaping youths and sacred bulls, could not conceal the unease that settled over the court. King Minos, who had once invoked the gods to legitimize his reign, now faced the consequences of a broken vow. He had promised Poseidon that the divine bull, sent as a sign of favor, would be sacrificed in honor of the sea god. Instead, Minos kept the beast, hoping its power would strengthen his rule. The gods answered with a curse that left the queen, Pasiphae, overcome by unnatural desire, and the child that followed, Asterion, bore the mark of both divinity and transgression. Asterion's presence became a living reminder of Minos' deception. The king's fear was not only of the god's wrath, but of scandal. In a society where the bull was celebrated as a symbol of fertility and strength, the birth of a bull child should have been an omen of greatness. Yet the union was seen as monstrous, a secret shame that threatened the fragile image of the royal house. Even Pasiphae, who had once delighted in the rituals and mysteries of the palace, found herself isolated, her son's existence whispered about in the darkest corners. Where Asterion should have been honored, he became a problem to be solved. Minos' decision to imprison his son was not driven by paternal grief, but by calculation. The construction of the labyrinth, commissioned from Daedalus, the most ingenious craftsman of the age, was less an act of mercy than a necessary concealment. The king could not risk rivals or foreign emissaries learning of the child in the palace. Asterion was sealed away, his name erased from the public record. The labyrinth, with its twisting corridors and unending turns, became a fortress of shame, built to contain both a body and a secret. To maintain his grip on power, Minos turned his family's tragedy into a tool of domination. When Athens defied Crete, Minos demanded a tribute. Every 9 years, 14 youths, 7 boys and 7 girls, were sent from Athens to Knossos. The official story claimed these children were sacrificed to the Minotaur, a monster lurking in the depths. In truth, this tribute was a public display of Cretan supremacy, a reminder of Minos' authority and the price of disobedience. The myth of the Minotaur became a weapon, its terror magnified by distance and rumor. The real victim, locked away in darkness, was Asterion himself. As the years passed, the world outside forgot the prince, who once bore a name of Starlight. The palace carried on with its feasts and ceremonies, but the shadow of the labyrinth reached into every chamber. Minos ruled with the confidence of a man who had buried his shame beneath stone, but the cost was a son condemned to solitude, a life traded for power, and a legacy forever stained by secrecy. Stone closes behind him, and the world of sunlight vanishes. The labyrinth is not a storybook maze, but a living architecture, with corridors that twist and double back, stairways that drop into shadow, rooms that swallow sound. Archaeologists have mapped these passages with laser scans, tracing their tangled lines beneath the ruins of Knossos. The data reveals a structure built to confuse, not to comfort. Corridors less than 1 meter wide force the body to turn sideways. Blind corners hide sudden drops. Doors vanish into seamless walls of marl stone. There is no single path, only a web of choices that lead nowhere. In these underground chambers, light is a rare and precious thing. Measurements from similar Bronze Age spaces show illumination falling below 25 lux, less than the light of a cloudy evening, barely enough to see a hand in front of the face. The palace's famed light wells reach only the upper floors. Down here, the air is thick with moisture. Humidity hovers above 70%, clinging to skin and bone. The stone sweats, and every breath tastes of earth. Sound behaves strangely in these halls. Acoustic studies of the labyrinth's chambers reveal a reverberation time of more than 2 seconds. A single footstep echoes, then echoes again, until it seems to come from every direction at once. Water drips in the distance, the noise stretching and bending through empty rooms. Sometimes the silence is so complete that the blood in one's ears becomes the only music. At other times, the smallest movement sets off a chorus of returning sounds, as if the walls themselves are whispering secrets. For Asterion, the world becomes a shifting puzzle of touch and sound. He learns to count his steps between turns, to feel for the rough seam where one stone ends and another begins. The darkness is not total, but it is deep enough to erase the memory of color. Shapes blur, and the mind fills the void with imagined monsters, until the only presence left is his own. In the labyrinth, time loses its meaning. Day and night are measured by the hunger in his belly, the cold rising from the floor, the distant rattle of a door being bolted far above. Every sense is sharpened and dulled at once. The skin prickles in the damp, the ears strain for any sign of life. But the only company is the echo of his own breathing, the slow drip of water, the thud of his heart. The labyrinth is not just a prison of stone, it is a maze of the mind, a place where hope dissolves and the self begins to unravel. Here, Asterion is neither prince nor beast, only a shadow moving through endless corridors, searching for a way out that does not exist. Inside the labyrinth, time thins and memory distorts. Days bleed into nights, or what passes for them in the low gray light. Asterion paces the same uneven stones, counting steps, tracing cracks, searching for proof that he is still real. The world outside has vanished, replaced by a silence so complete it presses on his ears, interrupted only by the echo of his own movements or the distant drip of water. The air is heavy with damp, and the cold seeps into his bones. Hunger gnaws, but it is the emptiness, the absence of voices, of touch, of recognition that hollows him most. Modern science has a name for what happens in such darkness. In a 30-day study of solitary confinement, researchers found cortisol levels rising by nearly 80% above normal. The body's alarm system stuck in overdrive. Brain scans showed a 25% drop in cortical activity, especially in the regions that shape identity and hold together a sense of self. Prisoners spoke of losing track of who they were, of feeling themselves dissolve into the walls. Dissociation, they called it. In one survey, half of those held alone for a month reported episodes where they felt unreal, as if watching their life from a distance. For Asterion, these clinical symptoms become a lived reality. The labyrinth's echo distorts every sound, stretching a footstep into a chorus, making it impossible to tell where he ends and the maze begins. Sometimes he whispers his own name, Asterion, just to hear it spoken aloud. Sometimes he forgets the sound of his mother's voice or the warmth of sunlight on his skin. The mind, deprived of contact and meaning, turns inward. Shadows become phantoms. Hunger twists into fear. He invents companions from memory, holds conversations with ghosts, and waits for the next door to open, though he knows none ever will. A psychologist describes it this way: when a person is deprived of all social contact and sensory input, the brain's networks begin to shut down. The boundaries between self and environment blur. Over time, the person may lose the thread of their own identity, experiencing episodes of depersonalization or even hallucinations. The stress is not just emotional, but physiological. Cortisol surges, neural activity drops, and the risk of lasting trauma grows with each day in isolation. Asterion's world contracts to the rhythm of his own breathing. There are moments of frantic pacing, then hours of stillness, staring into the dark, waiting for something, anything to break the monotony. The hope of escape fades, replaced by a numb acceptance. He is no longer prince or monster, only a presence moving through endless corridors, suspended between memory and oblivion. In this silence, he becomes a question with no answer, a name almost forgotten. Then, at the edge of exhaustion, a faint light flickers in the distance. A torch, and with it, the sound of footsteps, not his own. Asterion's world, once emptied of all but his own footsteps and breath, quivers with something foreign, a ripple in the silence, a vibration through stone. The hush of the labyrinth sharpens every sense. Sound travels strangely here, a drip of water, the faint scurrying of unseen life, and now the unmistakable rhythm of footsteps, not his own, not the measured pacing of a captive, but the hesitant, deliberate tread of someone who does not belong. Each step sets off a cascade of echoes, bouncing off walls impossible to place. The air thickens, charged with the scent of oil and sweat, the faintest trace of something burning. Light, weak and flickering, crawls along the floor, torchlight spilling into the darkness, chasing away the gray that has become his companion. Asterion freezes, every muscle coiled. The torch's glow grows brighter, gold against the damp stone, casting monstrous shadows that dance and dissolve. The footsteps slow, then stop. For a moment, nothing moves. The only sound is the ragged pull of his own breath and the distant, uncertain heartbeat of the intruder. Plutarch once wrote of Theseus entering the labyrinth in silence, careful not to betray his presence. Yet in these endless corridors, stealth is impossible. The walls betray every movement, every hope of secrecy lost to the maze's own design. Asterion's mind races. Is this the return of a keeper, the cruel game of another tribute, or something different, a presence that feels both foreign and fated? The light grows, swallowing the darkness between them. The world narrows to two figures, one approaching, one waiting. Suspense stretches thin, as if the air itself is holding its breath. In that charged stillness, the moment before recognition, prince and intruder stand at the edge of fate, separated by nothing but a trembling shaft of light. The torchlight flickers, catching the gleam of horn and the pale blur of human skin. Theseus stands at the threshold, silent, his hand wrapped around a length of crimson thread. Ariadne's thread, the promise of escape for one, the end for another. In the ancient texts, the moment is brief. A single blow, the labyrinth at last emptied. But the old manuscripts do not record the silence before the strike, or the way Asterion's gaze meets Theseus's in the half-light. No words pass between them. There is only breath and the memory of a world denied. Borges imagined Asterion welcoming his death as a kind of release, a final kindness after years of solitude. In that telling, the Minotaur does not fight. He bows his head, recognizing in his killer not an enemy, but a stranger who will end his suffering. The duel, so often painted as a clash of hero and beast, becomes a quiet surrender. Theseus's blade finds its mark. The labyrinth falls still. Ariadne's thread unspools behind the hero, marking the path out. Yet no thread leads back to the one left behind. Ancient scholars note the absence, a gap in the story where Asterion's voice should be. The world moves on, but in the hush that follows, only the echo of a name remains. If you believe his story deserves to be heard, subscribe for more. In every age, those born into shame or difference still risk being cast into darkness, not for their choices, but for others' fear. Today, solitary confinement continues to inflict psychological torment worldwide, mirroring Asterion's fate. The real monster isn't always the one behind the walls. Sometimes it's those who build them. Subscribe for more untold stories from the shadows.